The steering wheel felt slick beneath Maya's palms, though whether from the humidity trapped inside her Honda or the cold sweat coating her hands, she couldn't determine. Her keys dangled from the ignition, unturned. The parking lot of Community Hope Services stretched empty around her, the last of her coworkers having departed nearly an hour ago. Streetlights flickered on in the gathering dusk, casting orange halos that did nothing to penetrate the darkness pressing against her chest. She couldn't make her hands stop shaking. The day had started before dawn, as most of her days did. Maya had arrived at the crisis center by 7, prepared to facilitate the morning group session for trauma survivors. She'd listened to Jennifer describe nightmares that left her afraid to sleep. She'd held space for Marcus as he recounted the anniversary of his daughter's death. She'd guided Teresa through a breathing exercise when the fluorescent lights triggered a flashback to the basement where she'd been held captive. Maya had offered each of them her complete presence, her unwavering attention, the steady calm that everyone had come to expect from her. Then lunch had dissolved into phone calls that devoured what remained of her day. Her mother first, voice tight with that particular strain of loneliness that always preceded a lengthy monologue about how the divorce had ruined her life, how Maya's father had destroyed everything, how empty the house felt now that all the children had gone. Maya had murmured sympathetic responses while microwaving leftover pasta she wouldn't have time to eat, her own lunch break evaporating into her mother's need for validation. Her father called 20 minutes later, ostensibly about borrowing money again, though the conversation meandered through his regrets about the marriage, his struggles to make rent, his belief that Maya understood him better than anyone. She'd promised to transfer funds she couldn't quite afford, knowing he'd never pay her back, knowing she'd never ask him to. Between client sessions, her best friend Keisha had texted a crisis about her boyfriend's latest betrayal, and Maya had spent her afternoon break crafting careful responses, offering perspective, suggesting boundaries Keisha wouldn't implement, providing the emotional scaffolding that kept Keisha from collapsing entirely. Then Daniel had called. Her younger brother's voice had carried that telltale thickness, words slightly slurred at the edges. Maya had felt her stomach drop even before he'd admitted he'd used again, that the 30 days he'd managed to string together had shattered against his inability to sit with discomfort. He'd needed her to tell him it would be okay, that he wasn't a failure, that recovery wasn't linear. She delivered these assurances automatically, a script she'd memorized through repetition, while her own heart hammered with fear and frustration and a weariness so profound it felt embedded in her bones. Jasmine had texted during the drive to the parking lot, a cascade of messages about whether her 3-year-old's tantrums were normal, whether she should be worried, whether Maya thought she was failing as a mother. Maya had dictated responses at red lights, reassuring her younger sister that toddler defiance was developmentally appropriate, that Jasmine was doing fine, that everything would work out. Now, alone in her car, Maya couldn't remember a single thing she'd said to any of them. The words had flowed from some automated part of herself, the machinery of caretaking that operated independently of her conscious mind. She'd been present for everyone's pain while somehow absent from her own body. The trembling had started in her hands, but now radiated through her arms, her chest, her legs. Her breath came in shallow gasps that couldn't seem to fill her lungs. The parking lot tilted sideways, and Maya gripped the steering wheel harder, trying to anchor herself to something solid as the world. Dissolved into fragments. She was 12 again, standing in the kitchen of their old house while her parents screamed at each other in the living room, her mother's voice shrill with accusations, her father's booming with defensive rage. Daniel, only 8, had been crying in his room. Jasmine, barely 6, had clung to Maya's waist, asking when the yelling would stop. Maya had made them dinner that night, grilled cheese sandwiches and canned soup, because neither parent had emerged from their separate corners to consider that children might need to eat. She'd read Jasmine a bedtime story. She'd sat with Daniel until he fell asleep. She'd become the adult because the actual adults had abdicated their roles. The pattern had calcified over the following years. When her father moved out, Maya had been the one to explain it to her siblings in terms they could understand. When her mother spent weeks in bed, curtains drawn against the daylight, Maya had packed school lunches and forged permission slips and maintained the fiction that everything was fine. When Daniel started acting out in middle school, Maya had attended parent teacher conferences because her mother couldn't face another conversation about her failures. When Jasmine needed help with homework, needed advice about boys, needed someone to notice she existed, she'd turn to Maya. Being needed had become Maya's entire architecture of self worth. She'd chosen social work because helping people was the only thing she knew how to do, the only context in which she felt competent and valuable. She'd built a career from the rubble of her childhood, transforming her trauma into professional expertise. Everyone praised her for it: her professors, her supervisors, her clients, her family. Maya Reeves, who always knew what to say, who never fell apart, who could handle anything. Except she couldn't handle this. The panic attack, because that's what this was, though Maya had never experienced one before, crested like a wave pulling her under. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Her heart felt like it might explode through her ribs. She couldn't catch her breath, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except grip the steering wheel and try not to drown. Simone's face appeared in her mind, her partner's gentle concern when Maya had come home exhausted night after night, too depleted to engage in conversation, too emptied out to be present. Simone had suggested therapy months ago, had left Dr. Okonkwo's card on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "I love you. Please." Maya had finally called last week, had attended her first session 3 days ago. Dr. Okonkwo, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an unsettling ability to see through Maya's practiced composure, had asked a question that had lodged itself like a splinter in Maya's consciousness. When was the last time you allowed yourself to need someone else? Maya hadn't been able to answer. The panic began to recede slowly, leaving her wrung out and shaking. She managed to turn the key, to navigate the familiar streets toward home, driving on autopilot while her mind spun through the wreckage of the day. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her bag, probably Jasmine with more questions, or her mother wanting to continue their earlier conversation, or Keisha needing additional support. Maya didn't reach for it.